Hey guys, Maction here from TabletRoms.com, and I'm back with part 2 of our review of the Sero 7 Lite and the Sero 7 Pro. Now this time we're going to focus primarily on performance and battery life. And, well, just for starters, in the performance, I ran several different benchmarking utilities. Now, you'll see what I mean in a second. Not everything is programmed to respond to those extra cores in an efficient manner. For example, on the Antutu benchmark, the Lite comes out with 11,500 on average, and the Pro 11,950. Whereas on the Quadrant benchmark, the Lite comes out with an average of 4,240, and the Pro with a 4,040. Now this is because Quadrant isn't quite as well adaptive to a quad core. It's mostly keeping track of the clock speed, and since the Sero 7 Lite has a higher clock speed with 1.6 gigahertz, it gets a higher score in Quadrant. Now, in a lot of ways, many of the games that you'll play are the same way. They don't take advantage of the extra cores, but we'll get into that a bit more later. Now, the user interfaces, as I'm sure you've noticed, look just a little bit different. This is because the Sero 7 Lite is running Android 4.1, whereas the Sero 7 Pro is running Android 4.2. There are a lot of changes in those Android versions. Some things have been moved around, other things, you've got different ways to access a few different things. Overall, the changes appear to be primarily aesthetic, rather than anything particularly impressive on the optimization side. Although there are a few slight optimizations in 4.2 that weren't there in 4.1. Now you will notice as I have these two games playing side by side that there doesn't appear to be much of a difference at all between the Lite and the Pro. And that's because games just haven't not yet been programmed to take advantage of the extra cores, which means you don't really have that much of a performance difference. So it's really kind of a pair of sixes whether or not, from a game's standpoint, you go for the Sero 7 Lite or the Sero 7 Pro. Now, as I'm sure you will notice, there is a difference in resolution, and that's because for some reason, the Sero 7 Pro that I have was stuck outputting over HDMI 480p, which is not where you want it to be. I tried tinkering with it, trying to get it, working the way I wanted within the constraints of the stock firmware, because I didn't want to modify it during the purposes of the test. But I just could not get it working properly. So this, if it's present in other Sero 7 Pros, is definitely a drawback that you might want to consider. Now let's go over battery life just a little bit. The Sero 7 Lite happens to have a 3400 milliamp battery, whereas the Sero 7 Pro has a 4000 milliamp battery. I like to take and do several hours of YouTube, Netflix, standby, and these sorts of things to give you an idea of how well the battery is going to last. And on the Sero 7 Lite, you should experience a 16% drop in battery for every hour of YouTube, a 35% drop per hour of Netflix, and on standby, you're going to drop about 1% every 5 hours. Now that's on the Lite. On the Pro, YouTube's going to drop you down about 10% every hour, Netflix 22% every hour, and standby mode about 1% every 13 hours. Now I know what you're going to say. Maction, that's 3400 milliamps versus 4000 milliamps. Of course the percentages are going to be different. But when you work that out, 16% of 3400 milliamps is 544 milliamps on the Lite, whereas 10% is 400 milliamps. So it's not all because of the battery size, but also because of the optimizations due to the processor. So all of that being said, which one of these tablets should you go for? In my opinion, I'm stuck between making no decision at all and taking them both back. And there are two big reasons. The bad battery life makes me disinclined to hang on to the Sero 7 Lite. On the Sero 7 Pro side, its inability to output good quality HDMI makes me very hesitant to hang on to this. However, everything else is pretty good. If you're going to pick between the Sero 7 Lite and the Sero 7 Pro, and the HDMI output's not a big deal for you, go for the Pro. It'll compete better with the higher-end tablets that are coming out, and also be able to do some of the higher-end games that will be coming out in the future. Whereas I'm afraid that the Sero 7 Lite will very quickly be left behind.